Have you ever found yourself standing in front of a shelf, maybe grabbing your morning coffee, and you just pause? You start wondering, where does my money really go? Well, today we're going to dive deep into that exact moment, exploring the really complex, often heated debate around boycotting certain brands and the powerful role our own conscience plays in these everyday choices.
You know, this line was actually written on a blackboard during a fiery classroom debate, and it just perfectly captures what we're talking about. See, this isn't about finding one single right answer for everybody. It's really about understanding the value of our own internal compass.
And that classroom is exactly where our story kicks off. Because to really get to the heart of this whole dilemma, there's no better way than to see how it played out with a group of high school students talking about globalization.
So imagine this. The teacher throws out the question, and boom, the room just splits right down the middle. On one side, you have a student, Aisha, who's saying, "There's no way I can buy these things. I feel like my purchase is supporting the suffering of children in Palestine." But on the other side, a student named Can fires back, "Come on, how's my coffee going to stop a war? This has nothing to do with us."
And right there in that classroom, you see the two sides of this whole debate laid bare. For the boycotters, it's a moral issue, plain and simple. Every single purchase is like casting a vote with your wallet. But for the consumers, it's more about personal freedom, you know? The link between their burger and some far-off global conflict just feels way too abstract. One side is driven by a feeling of responsibility, the other by personal choice and convenience.
So what is it that makes that boycotter position so incredibly strong for some people? Well, it really all boils down to one powerful internal concept: conscience, or as it's known in Turkish, vicdan.
And conscience isn't just some vague feeling of guilt you get sometimes. It's much more than that. Think of it like a really complex internal guidance system. It's your own personal moral compass, and it's been shaped by everything you've ever experienced, everything you believe, everything you've felt. It's that little voice inside that pipes up when an action just doesn't sit right with your deepest values.
In this compass of yours, it works in 3 really clear steps. First, it brings awareness. It lets you see that an action could potentially cause harm. Then, it creates a sense of responsibility. That's that feeling you get deep in your gut that something is just off. But, and this is the crucial part, it doesn't just leave you there feeling bad. It motivates you to actually do something, to change your behavior. It turns that passive guilt into an active choice.
Okay, so that leads us to the absolute core of this whole debate. Do these choices, these decisions driven by our conscience, do they actually have any real power in the world? Right, this is the argument you hear all the time. Does my one little purchase really matter in a global economy worth trillions of dollars? Does my cup of coffee actually give power to anyone? It's a fair question. Well, the answer seems to be yes, but it's not always a straight line. Sure, one purchase is like a single drop in the ocean, but what happens when millions of people add their drop? You create a tide. That's collective action. And it's not even just about the money lost from sales. Widespread boycotts send a massive signal. They can seriously damage a brand's reputation. And in today's world, that can be way more costly than a dip in profits. All right, let's switch gears and look at one of the strongest counterarguments you'll hear from folks who choose to keep buying these products. And honestly, it's a very logical and very common defense.
I mean, this is a powerful point, isn't it? The government lets these companies operate here. They hire people from our communities, they pay taxes. So if the actual authorities don't have a problem with it, why should any individual citizen? And this right here highlights a really fundamental difference we have to understand. Legal permission, that's external. It just tells you what you can do without getting into trouble with the law. But moral responsibility, that's internal. That comes from your conscience, and it's asking a totally different question. Not, can I do this, but should I do this? And think about it this way. The state permits all sorts of things, right? Alcohol, tobacco, gambling, they're all legal. But does that automatically mean they're the right or beneficial choice for every single person? Of course not. The law sets a minimum standard for society, but it never replaces our own personal moral code. The final choice always comes back to our own values.
So this brings us all the way back to that feeling of helplessness, doesn't it? That nagging sense that your one choice is just too small to matter when you're up against these massive global issues.
There's this old proverb that just perfectly sums up this mindset. Let the snake that doesn't bite me live 1,000 years. It's basically the philosophy of looking the other way. You know, the belief that if a problem isn't right on your doorstep, then it's not your problem to solve.
But there's another way to look at that proverb, not as advice, but as a warning. See, injustice, when you ignore it, it doesn't just stay in one place. It has a tendency to grow, to become normalized, to spread. The snake you let live today might just find its way to your door tomorrow. From this point of view, ignoring injustice anywhere becomes a threat to justice everywhere.
And for a lot of people who boycott, the goal isn't necessarily to wake up tomorrow and find out they've stopped a war. It's more personal. It's about refusing to be a single link in a chain that they believe is immoral. It's about being able to look at yourself and say, whatever's happening, my money, my actions, they won't be a part of it. So, after all that, where does this leave us? We've walked through the arguments for conscience, for convenience, for legality, for personal integrity. So now let's try to bring it all together into a simple framework that you can actually use for yourself.
Ultimately, what this does is it completely shifts the question. It stops being a simple consumer choice, like which brand of soda should I get, and it becomes something much, much deeper. It becomes a moment of reflection on what kind of systems, what kind of values your money is helping to build and sustain in the world.
So if you're ever facing this dilemma, here's a simple 3-step way to think about it. First step, information. Do a little digging, look past the name on the cup, and try to understand the bigger corporate structure. Who owns this? Where do the profits actually end up? Second, conscience. Just take a second and check in with yourself. Ask, am I truly at peace with this purchase? And finally, the third step, values. Compare this one action with your core beliefs about the world. Does this purchase actually align with the person you want to be?
And at the end of the day, that's really what it all comes down to. We are all absolutely free to make our own choices. But it's those very choices, from the huge, life-altering ones to the small, mundane ones like which coffee we decide to drink, that ultimately tell the story of who we are and what we really stand for. The choice, as always, is yours.